Middle-earth Shadow of War is right around the corner, and there's a lot of new stuff going on. It's not totally different from Shadow of Mordor, but there are a lot of things that have been expanded upon and added. Today on gameranx, we're here to bring you 10 things you need to know about Middle-earth Shadow of War. Starting off at number 10, Shadow of War picks up where Shadow of Mordor left off. Talion is still infused with the spirit of Celebrimbor, and they forged a new ring of power, and with it they plan on taking control of Mordor. If you watch the story trailer, there's actually more narrative in that trailer alone than all of Shadow of Mordor, honestly. Okay, maybe it's not that bad, but the story in Shadow of Mordor definitely wasn't the strongest aspect of that game. It just felt kind of there, which sucked because the Lord of the Rings universe is so big and so rich, and there's more than enough room for an awesome story. Shadow of War takes place 60 years before the events of Fellowship of the Ring, and Monolith is keeping big key moments of the Lord of the Rings universe in mind. Studio head Kevin Stevens said, "It's a lot like Rogue One. We know the beginning of the next story, so we want to make sure our story fits without feeling arbitrary or contrived." Which I think is a great approach. I don't need it to tie directly into Fellowship, but I'd love to know that both stories exist within the same universe, and maybe give us some cool Easter eggs or something along the way. And moving on to number 9, in Shadow of Mordor, you eventually unlock the ability called Shadow Mount, and this lets you mount certain beasts and use them to either quickly zip around the map or to kill enemies. As cool as that ability was, it only let you mount like 2 creatures, the Caragor and the Grog, but if you've watched any of the Shadow of War gameplay demos that have been bouncing around since its announcement, you'll see that one of them actually has Talion freeing a trapped drake, which is essentially a dragon, and then mounting it and using it to attack the fortress. These fortress battles already seem so hectic, and to throw a dragon into the mix, it's gotta be totally bonkers. The Monster of Mordor trailer shows Talion riding a few different beasts, but it also shows a Balrog. Not Talion riding one, but how cool would it be if maybe you could? Next, number 8, personally, I always found the lack of different weapons and armor in Shadow of Mordor really strange. There were runes and DLC armor, but it wasn't the same as having an actual loot system. But that's changing with Shadow of War. Now there are different pieces of gear you'll find throughout your journey. Each piece being of a different rarity and having some sort of perk. A lot of these weapons will also have gem sockets that you can install gems into, making them that much more powerful. Certain weapons will also have a challenge attached to it, and upon completing that challenge, you'll unlock another perk for that piece of gear. Swords and armor don't just have different perks and stats, but they'll also have different cosmetic looks too. And I know this isn't the biggest change coming from the first one, but I'm a sucker for some good gear, so for me, this is one of the cooler additions of the sequel. Next up, at number 7, if you've booted up Shadow of Mordor recently, you may have noticed something new called Nemesis Forge. It's here that you'll be able to export your highest ranking ally and nemesis into Shadow of War when it releases. The Nemesis system is still such an awesome gameplay mechanic, and to see it cross over from the first game into the sequel is really cool. My highest ranking nemesis was always such a dick. He'd show up out of nowhere and ruin everything, and I can't wait to have him do the same thing to me in Shadow of War. Moving on to number 6, while we're on the topic of the Nemesis system, it makes sense to talk about the changes that Monolith has made to it for Shadow of War. The biggest addition to this system is definitely the Nemesis Fortresses. These fortresses seem to be a very important part of the game. It actually seems like this is what you're always building your army up for. It's attacking and taking over these fortresses that's going to help you control the region. And after launching your attack and hopefully being successful, you promote one of your war chiefs to Overlord, and now that fortress is yours to control. But this isn't a simple and quick process. There's actually a few steps you need to do before launching an attack. Taking out the Overlord's war chiefs, for example, the more you assassinate, the easier the siege will be, or instead of killing them, you could convert them to follow you, and then have spies planted on the inside, and then have them fight alongside you during the attack. But before you do that, you're going to want to gather intel on the war chiefs and the Overlord to learn of their strengths and their weaknesses. You then need to plan your attack. Every fortress is different and have different defenses that you're going to need to plan around. And then you launch your attack, you fight your way to the Overlord, you kill him, you take over the fortress. I know I kind of make it sound easy here, but it really isn't. It seems pretty involved, and there's definitely a lot of planning that goes into it. With all the different fortress defenses and the different strengths and weaknesses certain orcs have, which apply to both your army and the opposing one, each one of these assaults should play out fairly different. Moving on to number 5, Shadow of War will be both PS4 Pro and Xbox One X enhanced. On the Xbox One X, the game will support HDR, run at native 4K, and run at 30 frames per second. We don't have the full details on the PS4 Pro enhancements yet, but we do know that it will have HDR support, so at least we have that. But besides that, we don't know anything about the frames per second, and we don't know what resolution it'll be running with either. Moving on to number 4, to jump back to Fortress Assaults for a minute, let's talk about the new Social Conquest mode. In Social Conquest, you can take one of your fortresses, assign it an overlord and war chiefs, and upgrade the defenses for the fortress and the army itself, and then share that fortress online for other players to attack. The attacking player would treat it just like they would any other fortress assault. You fight your way to the overlord, you kill him, you win the assault. This can be played in both regular and ranked. Regular conquests make it so the attacking player won't lose any followers that are killed after returning to their game. But when playing in ranked, if you lose a captain during the assault, that's it, that captain is gone for good. After successfully completing one of these assaults, you'll be rewarded with a conquest loot chest and spoils of war. Spoils of war being points that you can use to purchase spoil of war chests. Speaking of loot chests, let's move on to number 3. Yes, Shadow of War will have loot boxes because every game seems to have loot boxes nowadays, and with loot boxes usually comes microtransactions, which it also has. But what exactly are you getting out of these loot boxes? They contain weapons, armor, XP boosts, orcs that you can use in your army, and training orders which are used to customize and level up your orcs. To purchase these loot boxes, you can use the in-game currency that can be acquired by doing certain things throughout the game, or you can use gold, which is a currency that can be purchased with real money, but it's also given out in the game in small quantities. According to Warner Brothers, everything that you can purchase with gold is available to you in-game without having to spend any real money, and that it won't affect your overall gameplay experience, and that it isn't required to progress through the game. Now, I've said numerous times in past videos that I'm okay with microtransactions as long as they're implemented in the right way, but I don't really know which side of the fence I fall on with Shadow of War. I can't help but think about Social Conquest, which I think sounds really cool, but how will these microtransactions affect that? Will certain players have an insanely hard fortress because they purchased all of their orcs? I guess we'll just have to wait to find out. Next up on number 2, one thing I haven't been seeing many people talking about is the fact that Shadow of War actually has an endgame called Shadow Wars. So after beating the game and conquering all of Mordor, which is something I'm sure we all knew was going to happen at the end, Sauron launches a counterattack and tries to retake all of Mordor from you. And the way this works is now you're on the defending side of the fortress assaults. So instead of breaking through the defenses, you're trying to prevent the enemy from breaking through yours, and instead of capturing points, you're defending them, etc., etc. You get the point. And that enemy army can overthrow you and you'll lose that fortress, which will lead to your overlord being captured, which will then lead to you having to launch a rescue mission and trying to get that fortress back from the enemy forces. I think it's a pretty interesting way to present an end game, and it sounds really cool. Beating the game will actually unlock the true ending, which is said to tie Shadow of War into the rest of Lord of the Rings. Finally, at number 1, we're going to finish with some housekeeping here. Shadow of War is out on October 10th on Xbox One, PS4, and PC. There's a standard release of the game for $60, an $80 silver edition that has 2 pieces of DLC and a silver war chest. Then there's a $100 gold edition that has everything in the silver edition plus 2 more pieces of DLC and a gold war chest. Then there's a $300 special edition that has all the digital stuff from the previous bundles, plus a bunch of physical goodies like a 12-inch statue. There's also a bundle called the My Precious Bundle. Yes, that's a real thing, and it comes with, you guessed it, a Ring of Power. So if you were looking to pick up this game, you have a few different editions to choose from. And those are 10 things you need to know about Middle-earth Shadow of War. But we want to hear from you. Meet us down in the comments and let us know what you think. As I'm sure you already know, hitting that like button really helps us out. And if you're new here, we put out videos like this every single day, and the best way to get them is with a subscription to the channel. As always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.